In this second installment, I speak to author Tokelo Hlagala, and in the first phase, we touched his journey through the media space, education space, how he came to be a publisher, as well as how he deviated from, in essence, being a sports science or sports person. And I think we ended the previous installment on the point of him essentially seeing the power and the impact that storytelling has had on township kids. And so we continue on that same vein. Tokelo? Oh,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're
yeah,
back.
yeah. No, we're back. You were still telling me essentially when you roll out, when you do the book clubs, and kids for the first time are seeing their names in books and seeing a story that follows some of their narratives. You're still telling me that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we were on the matter of representation. So I think essentially what everyone is trying to get when reading something is to find pieces of themselves in these stories. And because we're essentially trying to answer the question of who am I? And I think through storytelling, it's easier to navigate some of these questions we have about our own existential crisis, problems, and what so not. So because I remember even for me, the very first novel that I read that I felt I found a sense of myself was a novel by Bessie Head. I think the novel was called Maru, back in like primary or what so not. And then around the same time, I read Zixim Das Ways of Dying, which I too found pieces of myself, and so when I'm engaging with some of these learners and they're telling me about their life stories in relation to what they've read in my story, for me, it's an indication that as a writer, I've done my job because I've managed to get people not to tell me about my book, but to tell me about their life stories in relation to what they've gotten from this book that I wrote. And because I remember I had a conversation with the learners. So they came to me one day very angry. They were like, Minier, what is? I'm like, what's wrong? They're like, no, we don't like how the book ends. And for me, that was also a representation to say, now they've taken ownership of these stories. They also have a direction to say, this is how the story should end. And it made me realize that actually, as much as we say our kids are not interested in reading, maybe the problem is around representation to say some of the things that are there that they are reading are not mirroring their own internal or external world. And so, yeah, I think representation plays a huge role in storytelling because it allows people to see themselves through this thing, ultimately making it easier for these learners to say, actually, there's something within reading. Let me read other books. Let me go find other books that I can read in order to understand the world better.
Is it to understand the world better, or is it to understand how I evolve better as I keep
Yeah.
finding myself inside these little
Uh-huh.
pages of worlds that have been
Yeah.
created by people?
I think it's connected because
Yeah.
essentially I think it's the question of how do I navigate through life? And navigating through life means I have to understand myself and I also have to understand the things that are around me, other people, other characters, and all of those things. So I think those two are, connected.
And how have you seen it change the lives of the artists or the people that you put on? I'll call it put on. Um,
Mhm.
One of the transformational moments in my life was listening to an interview at Jay-Z, Oprah. And
Yeah.
very cliche, but I listened to it anyway. It's playing in the background. And Oprah explains what makes you so great. And Jay-Z says, I'm myself, you know?
Mhm.
And for the first time that clicked, because successful people always say these things that we think, you can say that because you have money, you know?
Yeah,
Up until JB
true.
said it, and he was like, I'm myself. And he said, I don't believe in myself. I know myself. And
Mm-hmm.
then I just act according to what I know. And if I don't
Mm-hmm.
belong here, I don't go there. If it feels natural to go there, then I go there.
Yeah.
And I've tried this now for 5 years, and I can say the most powerful people I've come across are people
Mm-hmm.
who occupy a room, and they don't occupy the room because they have confidence or whatever, but because
Mm-hmm.
they sit there and they just unapologetically themselves, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not in your face, they're not screaming at you, whatever.
Yeah.
They're just comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask them a
Yeah.
question, they don't stutter, they don't. It's especially a question that has to do with why did you do this? They're very
Mm-hmm.
clean to say, well, because, and they analyze for you, this is what I saw, this is what it is. What has it done for the artists? Again, from your observation, what have you
Mm-hmm.
seen about them? What are some of the stories that you've seen when artists, I like to say they unfold, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think starting with myself, I think essentially for me, what being a creative or being a practitioner of the arts and education is for me something that purifies my soul. These are things that I would do at any given point in time, whether I'm paid or not. So if you're saying come and pick up papers at our school, because education is something that's very important to me, I'll come and pick up those papers if it contributes to the betterment of the kids who are there. So essentially, I think the work that I've done over the years has just been there to say this thing has been purifying my souls in so many ways. And I see it with the different writers that I work with, the different creatives that I work with to say, there's some successful people that I've met who at some point in time they're like, I want to write a book. I don't know why, but I've got this feeling that says I need to write down my story, and yeah, I think it's a tough journey being a creative. It's extremely tough because especially for me, because I'm not traditionally trained. And now sometimes you can easily find yourself in a position where there's the imposter syndrome, to say, am I good enough in this thing? You're sitting with people who've got 7 PhDs or what's or not, and you're part of this panel of people where you need to give your insight about a particular topic, and for me, it's that thing of saying, because I understand also the amount of effort I've taken in developing myself as a human being and also as a creative, it makes it easier for me to maneuver and navigate the different spaces as a creative, as a thinker, and all of these things. So yeah, I think it's it's a journey which is tricky and tough because you don't know how things are going to unfold. You can't put timelines to say by this time I should have sold 1,000 copies or I should have gotten this and that. But then because there's something within me that says this is the way that you must go, I'm like, let's go. We shall see how this thing can unfold. So yeah.
And how expensive is it? Because a lot of why first what is it that comes to you that says I must write my story, you know
Mhm.
on the one
Yeah.
hand, most of us think that we need to achieve something to write our story, and then
Mhm.
on the other hand you get people that just have a burning sensation that, listen, I need to take
Mhm.
this thing that is inside of me, you know
Yeah.
they're not
Mhm.
necessarily doing it to become rich, or they're not necessarily doing it
Mhm.
because they've reached a milestone that says they're the greatest human being ever. It's a
Mhm.
certain thing inside that wants to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, as to what that feeling is, I really can't explain it myself. Just
yeah,
yesterday, I was visiting a friend, and the landlord, I think she's like in her 40s, 50s.
yeah,
She's like, yeah, man, the guy told me that you work with books. I've been trying to write a book,
Yeah.
about my life, society, and all of these things and all of these things. So as to what this desire is that people have about writing books, knowing very well that selling books it's tough and you're not gonna make a million from selling books. I don't know what it is, but there's just something within them that says, write this thing. For some, it's a matter of legacy, because mostly I work with people who are not writers per se, but people who are saying, I'm at this point in my life and I feel like I want to write an autobiography or a memo, or I want to tell this particular story. So yeah, for some of the people that I've worked with, the clients, is a matter of saying, I need this thing for legacy. I want to leave this thing for my kids so they can know my journey in life and all of those things. So yeah, I can't explain what it is because it's probably different reasons for different people. So for me, I think it was a matter of having understood the feeling that I felt when I first read that novel by Maru, that novel by Ziximda, to say the feeling that I got from reading that, I feel this is a feeling that I can give to someone else, because of my own journey and because of understanding or my perspective about life at this current moment. So I think it's different, reasons for different people.
And what's the process like? So I feel like I want to write my autobiography. What do I do? I give you a call, Tokelo, can you help me write my biography? I've never written in my life before. I just know that I'd
Yeah.
like to tell the story. Then what happens from there?
Yeah, so there's different ways in which we will have a conversation or different avenues that we can put in place. So one would be to say there's someone who has written different pieces about their life and they feel they want to write a book. So it's a matter of looking at already what they've written and having that back and forth conversation about how to refine the work, what more should the person write on, how should they approach their whole storyline. And then for some clients, it's a matter of saying, I've got a story, but I'm not a writer, but I want to write a book. And then in those cases, then we assign this person a ghostwriter. So it's typically someone they're going to tell their story, and this person will conceptualize the story in a way that the client is looking to sort of tell their story. And essentially, they write the book on behalf of this particular client. So those are some of the different ways in which the approach, is done. For those who feel like they're able to put something to paper, it's a matter of guiding them in terms of how should you go about building your plot, how do you go about storytelling, what are the different moments in your life that are crucial, how do we break down these moments into chapters, what do you write about, how do you express yourself, and all of those things. So those are the two ways in which typically autobiographies are done. And it is something that people don't even know, that you can have someone ghostwrite your autobiography. But it's what typically famous people do. They get someone to tell their story, and this particular person writes down the whole autobiography, but using their words and all of those things.
Yeah. And the ghostwriting process, how does it go? So in essence, you would tell the person the highlights of your life as far as possible, because I get it, that's what when you tell people who you are, that's essentially in essence what you are doing. You are telling people the
Yeah.
highlights of your life, right? And then they would be skilled in what? In prompting you, in imagining what would have been the circumstances around this particular thing happening. What what's ghostwriting like? How does it differ for you in terms of, because we still want to own it, right? I want to feel
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
me that wrote the story. Or when I read the story, I want to feel like it's me that is in these pages. Yeah. How would
Yeah.
you say the two differ materially?
So also, I think there's a skill to it also, in terms of, if I'm having a conversation with you about your life story and I'm gonna be ghostwriting your book, from how you speak, there's specific ways that you are using, ever so often. So those are some of the things I would typically pick up to say, okay, this is how this person expresses themselves, and I factor that into how I'm going to be writing the book. And also there's that Socratic method of engagement to say, I'm continuously asking you questions about everything you are telling in order for me to get a clear picture, because some of these things or some of these parts of your life can only come to life if I'm pressing you in certain corners to say, okay, how did this thing make you feel? What was happening in your life? Where were you? What's your relationship with that event at this moment in your life? So it's also a factor to say, from what angle are you writing this book from? Is it from a reflection perspective, or is it from a perspective of, I am currently on this journey of writing this book? So there's different angles in which we would look at the story and the approach, and those are some of the things that will affect how the book is written, and also having that back and forth conversation with the client to say, this is chapter 1. Tell me, how does it feel? Does it feel like it's you? Does the tone feel like, are these words that you typically use? Because it's easy for the person ghostwriting to use their own tone instead of using the tone of the particular client. So yeah, there's also a skill to it.
Yeah. And in that regard, do you think everybody has a story to tell? Or have you had a situation where you're like, yeah, no, this person's story is boring, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's a matter of, it also comes from me to say, am I asking the right questions
Yeah.
to this person? And also a matter of, is this person open enough to tell me the real emotions, the raw information? Because sometimes what happens is you find that the other person is not willing to open up. And this typically happens when you're ghostwriting a book of someone who's been in a traumatic situation. This can be abuse or whatever the case is. And so they just want to touch the surface of the story and not go deeper into actually what happened, what were the feelings you were having at that particular moment. And I've had those cases with clients who are struggling to express, more so because they are still going through this, they're still in this traumatic state, and so they can't go beneath the layer of healing or the layer of the trauma that they've been through. And so those are the books that are difficult to write because you don't have anything to go on but the surface information the person is sharing. So yeah, when writing autobiography, that's what I've realized, to say people who are predominantly writing their journey from a trauma perspective sometimes find it difficult to go beneath the layer because they are still battling to deal with some of these emotions that they have went through or they are still feeling about those moments in their lives. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that I think I've encountered in the space.
Okay. And then cost, how much does it cost to get my story, boring as it is, to be out there?
Yeah, it's a couple of $1,000. So it depends. If you are looking for someone to ghostwrite, transcribe, and all of those things, chances are you're not gonna spend anything less than 50K for that whole process. So roughly say something between 50K to 100 and above. But then if it's a matter of you've written down something that requires editing and those things, then you can spend north of 20K for such a process. That would include an editor, a proofreader, graphic design services, and all of those other nitty-gritties.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when you say I write for myself, I remember I was in grade 8 or 9. At that point, I thought, I know I made it somewhere. Let me write something, you know.
Yeah.
Is that Microsoft Word? I write, and then the page count there says 300 pages, 50,000 words. I bring it to you, and then you say that, okay, you'll proofread, you'll edit. you'll turn it into material and not just a hero perspective. Because I get a knife, I write,
Yeah.
every time I fell,
Yeah.
the end tripped me, but every time I got up,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
overcame the odds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, and that's one of the reasons that, well, I shouldn't be saying this, that I dislike motivational books,
Yeah.
because some of the people don't want to go beneath, they don't want to excavate beneath the layers to say, what were the actual emotions? Yes, you got up, but then at that moment in time, what were you feeling? Give us those raw emotions and not the hero element of things, So, yeah, typically you would send that 300 pages manuscript, and from the manuscript, a developmental editor will go through everything and try to see the different parts, the different transitions within your life to say, okay, from 2001 to 2006, this can be chapter 1 because the general theme around this is 1, 2, 3. Chapter 2 can be from this point in time to this point in time because of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there will then be a conversation between you and the editor to say, yes, we've gone through your script. This is the essence of what we are getting. But then from your own words, what are you trying to communicate through your book? And so from that conversation, then a sort of a plan comes in mind to say, what is the approach that we're going to use and how do you go about doing that? And then there's going to be this back and forth between you and the editor until the editing is done.
And then lastly, we then have the issue of copyrights and patents and whatever. In the moment I'll be happy, I'm writing a book, and that's all that matters to me. My story is out there. But
yeah,
20, 30, 50 years down the line, I'm not around anymore. And my kids want the story. They hear, or my grandkids, they hear, hooray, he wanted a book written about him. And they want to get it, but it turns out that the book is lost somewhere in ownership. When
yeah.
and how do these things of ownership come? Registration, what does it look like? Who does the book belong to after I publish it?
Yeah. So, and that's a very crucial thing to ask, because also there needs to be a conversation between the person, the writer, and the publisher, especially in cases where ghostwriting is involved. So it must be clear to say, how is the ownership of this book, designed? For some ghostwriters, what they would do is, I'm gonna ghostwrite your book. Some would say, you're gonna pay me this upfront fee, say maybe 20K for argument's sake, and then from there on, I'm gonna receive 15% royalties from each book sale that you make from now until the end of time. Right. So that's the approach some publishers use in the space, of which I'm not a huge fan of. Right. So for me, what we do is, there's a payment that you're gonna pay for your services. Once the book is printed, let me charge this phone.
Yeah.
Once the book is printed and released, the ownership of the book is absolutely up to you. We as the publisher are no longer involved because it's your book after all. So it's more of, you're paying a once-off service. Once we are done with your book, you control the book. You can decide you want to print with, how many copies you want. So that is ultimately up to you. But with other publishers, it's a matter of saying, you can only print the book with us as your publisher, which for me defeats the whole aspect of self-publishing. Because remember, we have two types of publishing, with the traditional publishing being, you submit your manuscript to a publisher, they cover the cost of publication and everything, but then they own distribution. So there's only one place where people can get your book is from this particular publisher, and they pay you royalties as a writer. And then you've got self-publishing, whereby you come to me with your manuscript and you say, give me editing services, proofreading, and what's on, what's not. I give you those services. Afterwards, you have your book, you go print with whoever. the book is absolutely owned by you. So those are some of the things that writers should have with their publisher to say, I'm looking for this type of publishing where I own my book, I own my copyright, so that in future, if I'm dead, my kids can print my book with whoever and continue selling. So yeah, the aspect of legalities is something that must be discussed before you go into any relationship with any publisher. Because I've had instances where there's a guy who published a book with an American company and he couldn't get his manuscript because part of the contract was that he can only print the book with that company. Now, factor the fact that the company is in the US. Now, he needs to pay the printing. He needs to pay delivery from the US coming here. That is a lot of money for such a process, So yeah, those are some of the things that are within, the space of publishing in terms of copyright. But yeah, your copyright, you register with the National Library. When you get your ISBN number, it's also part of the copyright. And so once the book has been printed and released, you've got a responsibility to deliver a copy to the National Library for archives and safety, so that should someone come and say, this is my book, then there's that evidence to say the ISBN number was given to this person, the original manuscript is in the library archives, so it's easy to solve the issues of copyright.
Yeah. And does it make money?
It depends.
Yeah.
It's a subjective thing. It's very subjective, much like all of business.
Yeah.
You need to have your own approach. So for me, I'll speak from my own personal perspective.
Yeah.
I'm not within the sort of the commercial or mainstream side of books. So for me, my approach to publishing is from the education perspective, meaning that my clients are mostly organizations that operate within the space of education. This would be universities, schools, the different NPOs. So that is primarily my approach and not necessarily the bookstore route or the selling of one copy at a time type of thing. Hence, in most cases, I don't even have copies of my book, but only print large quantities when there's a particular organization that wants these books for their learners. So for me, that approach works for me best. For some people, I'm not sure what approach they are using, but yeah, it's all a matter of how you've approached the business side of things. And for me, it's also a matter of saying, from the books, I'm not necessarily looking to make money because the business is within publishing. So the book is also driving people to the work that we are doing to say, if you want to publish, and then this is where you can go. So each and every engagement or lectures or events where I speak at, I'm essentially driving people to the business side of things. So the book is just one of the tools that I'm also using for marketing the business.
Publishing, I take it then it makes money. You hear I follow the money, I can hear, all right, you are directing the
Yeah, so I think one can make a living.
Yeah.
One can make a living, one can build a brand, So yeah, I would say one can build a brand and one can make a living, because I've got friends who've quit their 9-to-5 jobs to focus solely on publishing. Some have offices in different parts of the country. So yeah, I think it's all a matter of saying, are you willing to put in the effort?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason why I asked that publishing one, we laugh, but sometimes that is actually where we may need to be, I've been very fortunate to see what platforms can do and what owning these parts of the value chain sometimes can do, where you find that perhaps there's a number of people that have got books, but they will never get published because publishing is not accessible, not even that story writing itself.
Yeah.
The problem. Yeah. Okay.
True.
And
Yeah. So I mean,
publishing.
yeah. In terms of, I missed that.
In terms of, so I'm just expecting someone, so I just keep thinking I'm
Okay.
hearing them. In terms of nobody gets in your way, is it just like me today when I decide, or you know what, I'm in the business of painting a wall. If a client calls me, I take paint and I go paint and I come back. And then the stories that you hear in the media, in the news, that hey, there are gatekeepers, there are people that don't want to allow us in, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Those are myths, or are there real challenges that thing that essentially show you that hey, you don't belong here?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, in my own journey or my own experience, I wouldn't necessarily say there's gatekeepers.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, because for me, I don't know, like the whole notion of gatekeepers, for
yeah,
me, it's something that I oftentimes question,
yeah,
because for me, the business is to say we're in the business of publishing books.
yeah,
Let us go and find people who want publishing services,
yeah,
right? And so I don't think it would be fair for me to say there's gatekeepers within the space, because we essentially can control the whole value chain,
yeah,
right? In terms of editing, proofreading, everything, even printing. There's a friend of mine who's got a printing warehouse somewhere in Rodieport. Yeah,
yeah,
somewhere there.
yeah,
So the whole value chain of how a book is made is being controlled by us.
yeah,
So maybe in terms of gatekeepers, you can say gatekeepers in terms of retail, to say, how do I get my book to this prestigious bookshops and what's so not?
yeah,
Maybe in that area, people can speak of gatekeepers, but because I've never really intentionally planned to go that route, I wouldn't say in my journey there's been a moment where I felt that there's gatekeepers within this industry. It's just like in the music industry, where you can create your music, Spotify, put it there for streaming,
yeah,
so it's also a matter of saying, what is your approach to business? So my approach to business is simple, to say, this is what we do. Let us go and find people who want to publish books, full stop.
yeah,
So maybe other people have experienced it, in different ways, but personally, I don't think I'm in a position to speak about gatekeepers.
yeah. Lastly, in closing, Tokelo, say something. But
Mhm.
what I mean by that, right, is having had this conversation, nah, what's your giveaway? What's your takeaway? What's your thing that if someone comes and watches this and they've reached the end and they've heard everything, they've heard storytelling, they've heard publishing, they've heard art, and they bump into you in the street, what would you want them to walk away saying, having taken from your conversation with me?
Mhm. Sure, we've touched on a lot of things. Um, but I think at the top of my mind, I would say um, understanding the role of storytelling in society. That
Yeah,
would be one of the things. And it can be something also around building a business in an area where you find interest in,
yeah,
and you find some sort of healing,
yeah,
to say, me doing this thing purifies my soul,
yeah,
and I would do this thing at any given point in time. So yeah, I think those at the top of my mind, the role of storytelling in education, in society, it would be around studying a business in an area whereby you feel that this is something that I can do, not necessarily something that you've studied, but something you feel, following that intuition, so yeah, those are some of the things at the top of my head, because we've touched on a lot of things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Does the industry need us? As in, you know how they always say, yeah, we need more entrepreneurs, we need more art creators. Do you feel,
Yeah.
or do you feel like, no, guys, Kesharp, I've got this one. Yango
Yeah.
Bola.
So personally, I've got this one, but I feel that we need more voices. We need more of these companies that are operating within this space. Because I'm also looking at how, for example, the podcast industry has grown. And when you look at the podcast industry, it's all storytelling. So it can be a matter of now we are transposing some of the things that are being done on podcasts into books that people can read. So I'd say, yeah, we do need more players in the industry because the pie is too much, so all of us can get our own fair share, of the pie within the market.
Yeah. All right. No, I'll let you close off, particularly because I want you to tell us where we can get your book, where we can get some of your material, some of your artists, where we can get in touch with publishing company. And then as soon as you've done that, I'll make sure I don't have the last say.
All right. So the book can be purchased on Amazon ebooks and whatnot. And then the hard copies, if you're in SA, you can get them on afrocentricmedia.co.za. So you can easily buy the book online, pay online, and the book will be delivered to you when it's available. So yeah, essentially most of the things are on the website and social media pages, KCS Book Club page, Instagram and Facebook. That is where we post a lot of the content or information about what we are doing also.
Okay. KCS Book Club.
Yes.
All right. Thanks a lot, man, Tokelo. All the best for the future. I can't wait until you publish some of our stories.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting for those stories. So bring us those stories. We are ready.
All right. Sharp.
Thanks, brother.
No problem.